November 14, 1963, 2:47 in the morning. A small room on the third floor of the FBI field office in Manhattan. Two agents sat in darkness, headphones pressed against their ears, reel-to-reel tape recorder spinning slowly, capturing every word that came through the wire. Agent Thomas Riley had been listening to Bumpy Johnson's phone calls for 9 months. 9 months of gambling talk, numbers running, petty disputes between street soldiers. Nothing that would stick. Nothing that J. Edgar Hoover could use. But tonight was different. Tonight, the voice on the other end of Bumpy Johnson's private line made Riley sit up straight in his chair. Made him grab his partner's arm. Made him understand that what he was hearing could change American history. The voice belonged to Robert Francis Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States, the brother of President John F. Kennedy. And what he was saying to Bumpy Johnson, a convicted felon, a Harlem crime boss, a man the FBI had been trying to destroy for 3 decades, was nothing short of treason. At least, that is what J. Edgar Hoover would call it. Riley pressed the headphones tighter, afraid to miss a single syllable. Robert Kennedy's voice was clear, urgent, almost desperate. The convention is 8 months away. My brother needs the northern cities locked down. New York, Chicago, Philadelphia. The Negro vote has to come out in numbers we have never seen before. And you are telling me you can deliver Harlem? Bumpy Johnson's voice came through next, calm, measured, the voice of a man who had been negotiating with powerful men for 40 years. I am not telling you I can deliver Harlem, Mr. Attorney General. I am telling you I already have. What I need to know is what Harlem gets in return. Riley looked at his partner. His partner's face was pale, bloodless. They both understood. They were listening to the most powerful law enforcement official in America making a deal with the most powerful black gangster in America. And somewhere in the middle of that deal was the presidency itself. This is the story that history tried to bury. The story of how Bumpy Johnson, a man who never graduated high school, sat across from the brother of a president and negotiated the future of the civil rights movement. The story of how J. Edgar Hoover tried to use that tape to destroy both men. And the story of how Bumpy Johnson, always 3 moves ahead, turned Hoover's weapon into dust. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand America in 1963. This was not the America you read about in textbooks. This was an America on fire. In September, 4 little girls had been murdered when white supremacists bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. In June, Medgar Evers had been shot in his driveway by a Klansman. In cities across the South, black Americans were being beaten, hosed, attacked by dogs, murdered for trying to vote, murdered for sitting at lunch counters, murdered for existing. And in the North, in cities like New York and Chicago and Philadelphia, black communities were trapped in a different kind of prison. Poverty, police brutality, unemployment, discrimination in housing, in jobs, in education. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, but it was also fragmenting. Martin Luther King Jr. preached nonviolence, but younger activists were growing impatient. Malcolm X was calling for self-defense, for black nationalism, for a complete rejection of white America's promises. The black community was at a crossroads, and whoever could unite them, whoever could channel their anger and their hope into political power, would shape the next century of American history. Robert Kennedy understood this. He was not his brother. John Kennedy was cautious, political, always calculating the cost of every moral stand. But Robert Kennedy, Bobby, had been transformed by what he saw in the South. He had stood in the doorway of burning churches. He had held the hands of mothers who buried their children. He had looked into the eyes of men who wanted to kill him simply because he believed black Americans deserved equal rights. And he had come to a conclusion that would have horrified his political advisors. If the Kennedy administration was going to win in 1964, if they were going to build a coalition strong enough to pass meaningful civil rights legislation, they needed more than speeches. They needed the streets. They needed the numbers. They needed Harlem. And Harlem meant Bumpy Johnson. Here is what you have to understand about Bumpy Johnson in 1963. He was not just a gangster. He had not been just a gangster for decades. Yes, he ran the numbers. Yes, he controlled territory. Yes, he had killed men and ordered men killed. But Bumpy Johnson was also the most trusted man in Harlem. When families could not pay rent, Bumpy paid it. When young men needed jobs, Bumpy found them. When the police beat innocent people on the streets, Bumpy made phone calls that stopped the beatings. When white businesses tried to exploit black customers, Bumpy showed up and suddenly the exploitation ended. He funded churches, sponsored youth programs, paid for funerals, covered medical bills. He was the shadow government of Harlem, the man who did what the real government refused to do. And everyone knew it. The ministers knew it. The shopkeepers knew it. The mothers and fathers knew it. The politicians knew it. You could not move Harlem without moving through Bumpy Johnson. And in 1963, Robert Kennedy needed to move Harlem. The first contact came through an intermediary. A lawyer named Samuel Pierce, a black attorney who worked with both the Civil Rights Movement and the Democratic Party. Pierce had known Bumpy for years, had represented some of his associates, understood how Harlem really worked. In September 1963, Pierce received a phone call from an aide in the Attorney General's office. The message was simple. Mr. Kennedy would like to have a private conversation with Mr. Johnson. No press. No records. Complete discretion. Pierce was stunned. The Attorney General of the United States wanted to meet with a known gangster. The same Attorney General who had made his reputation prosecuting organized crime. The same man who had gone after the Teamsters, the Mafia, the corrupt union bosses. Pierce called Bumpy that night. "Johnson," he said, using Bumpy's real name, "you are not going to believe what just happened." Bumpy listened without interrupting. When Pierce finished, Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell them yes. But not on their terms. On mine." Bumpy understood something that Pierce did not fully grasp. Robert Kennedy was not coming to him from a position of strength. He was coming from desperation. The 1964 election was approaching. The Civil Rights Bill was stalled in Congress. Southern Democrats were threatening to tear the party apart. And the black vote, which had been solidly Democratic since Roosevelt, was showing cracks. Malcolm X was telling black Americans that both parties were equally corrupt. Young activists were losing faith in the political process. Voter registration drives in the South were being met with violence, and the federal government seemed powerless to stop it. Kennedy needed something to show the black community that the administration was serious. He needed results, not promises. And he needed them fast. Bumpy knew all of this. He read the newspapers every day, 3 or 4 of them, along with magazines and books. He studied politics the way a general studies the battlefield. And he saw an opportunity that came along once in a generation. The first meeting happened on October 3, 1963, in an apartment on Central Park West. It belonged to a jazz musician who owed Bumpy favors, a man whose name has never appeared in any official record. Robert Kennedy arrived alone, which surprised Bumpy. No security detail. No aides. Just a 37-year-old white man in a dark suit, walking into a room where Bumpy Johnson sat waiting with 2 of his most trusted associates. Kennedy extended his hand. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for seeing me." Bumpy looked at the hand for a long moment before taking it. The handshake of a man who had ordered FBI surveillance on him. The handshake of a man whose department had tried to put him in prison multiple times. "Mr. Attorney General," Bumpy said, his voice flat. "This is unexpected." Kennedy sat down without being invited. "I know what you're thinking. You're wondering if this is a trap. Some kind of setup." Bumpy smiled. "That thought had crossed my mind. It's not. I came alone because what I'm about to say cannot leave this room. And I came to you because I've learned something in the past 3 years. The men in Washington who claim to speak for the Negro community, the ones who come to our meetings and smile for our cameras, they don't actually speak for anyone. They speak for themselves." Bumpy's eyes narrowed. "And you think I speak for someone? I think you speak for Harlem. Real Harlem. Not the Harlem in our briefing papers. The Harlem where people actually live." Kennedy leaned forward. "I need your help." Those 4 words hung in the air. The Attorney General of the United States, the second most powerful man in the country, asking a Harlem gangster for help. Bumpy's associates exchanged glances. But Bumpy himself showed nothing. No surprise. No satisfaction. Just that same cold, calculating stillness. "Help with what?" Kennedy took a breath. "In 8 months, my brother has to win re-election. If he loses, everything we've been fighting for, the Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Act, the war on poverty, all of it dies. The Republicans will tear it apart. The Southern Democrats will block everything. We will lose a generation. Bumpy said nothing, waiting. The black vote is going to decide this election, Kennedy continued. Not just in the South, but in the northern cities. New York, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia. If we can turn out black voters in numbers we've never seen before, we win. If we can't, we lose. And I have been told, by people who actually understand these communities, that voter turnout in Harlem depends on you. Bumpy let the silence stretch. Then he spoke slowly. You want me to tell people to vote for your brother. I want you to help me understand what your community actually needs. Not what politicians think they need. What they actually need. And then I want to figure out how to deliver it. In exchange for votes. In exchange for partnership. Real partnership. Not promises we don't keep. Not speeches that sound good on television. Real action. Bumpy studied Kennedy's face. Looking for the lie. Looking for the angle. And here is what made this moment extraordinary. He did not find one. Robert Kennedy was many things. Ruthless. Ambitious. Sometimes cruel. But in this moment, on this issue, he was telling the truth. He genuinely wanted to help. He had been changed by what he witnessed in the South. And he was willing to do what no attorney general had ever done, make a deal with a gangster to save the soul of the country. What exactly are you proposing? Bumpy asked. Kennedy pulled out a notebook. I've made a list. Federal housing money directed to Harlem specifically. Job training programs. Small business loans for Negro entrepreneurs. An end to discriminatory hiring in federal contractors. And most importantly, protection for voter registration workers. Real protection. Federal marshals if necessary. Bumpy looked at the list. This is significant. It's a start. There's more, but I need to know you're serious before I put everything on the table. Bumpy leaned back in his chair. You're asking me to trust you. The same man who has FBI agents following me everywhere I go. Who has my phone tapped. Who has been trying to build a case against me for 3 years. Kennedy's jaw tightened. You're right. And I cannot change that overnight. Hoover runs the bureau like his personal fiefdom. But I can promise you this. Whatever help you give me, I will remember. And when I have the power to change things, I will change them. Bumpy was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that Robert Kennedy would remember for the rest of his life. You want my help getting your brother reelected. Fine, but I want something first. Something that proves you mean what you say. Kennedy nodded. Name it. 2 weeks ago, a young man named Jerome Williams was beaten by police in front of his mother's house on 125th Street. He was 17 years old. He was carrying groceries. They fractured his skull, broke 3 ribs, arrested him for resisting arrest. He's still in the hospital. Kennedy's face went pale. I did not know about that. That's the problem, Bumpy said. You don't know. Your people don't tell you. Because they don't think it matters. Jerome Williams is nobody important. Just another colored boy in Harlem. But here is what I'm telling you, Mr. Attorney General. He matters to me. And if you want my help, I need to see that he matters to you too. What do you want me to do? I want the charges dropped. I want the officers disciplined. Not transferred, disciplined. I want Jerome Williams's hospital bills paid by the city. And I want it done in 1 week. Kennedy stared at Bumpy. That's a tall order. Consider it an audition. Kennedy stood up. He extended his hand again. 1 week. They shook hands. And for the first time, Bumpy felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. Not hope for himself. He was 60 years old. He knew his life would end the way it had been lived, in the shadows, on the margins. But hope for Harlem. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this generation of black children would inherit something better than the world he had grown up in. Exactly 1 week later, the charges against Jerome Williams were dropped. 2 officers were suspended. The city paid for his medical bills and issued a formal apology. And something else happened that made Bumpy Johnson smile. The story made the front page of the Amsterdam News. Not buried in the back. The front page. Attorney General's office intervenes in Harlem police brutality case. No mention of Bumpy. No mention of the deal. Just results. That was when Bumpy knew. Robert Kennedy was serious. Over the next 6 weeks, Bumpy and Kennedy met 4 more times. Always in secret. Always in different locations. A church basement in Harlem. A private room in a restaurant in Queens. A brownstone in Brooklyn owned by a sympathetic businessman. An apartment in the Bronx that belonged to one of Bumpy's oldest associates. And with each meeting, the partnership deepened. Kennedy brought policy proposals. Bumpy brought intelligence. He told Kennedy which federal programs were actually reaching black families and which ones were being siphoned off by corrupt administrators. He told him which local politicians could be trusted and which ones were taking money from landlords who kept their buildings in squalor. He told him which ministers genuinely cared about their congregations and which ones were in it for the donations. Kennedy wrote everything down. And, more importantly, he acted on it. A housing inspector who had been taking bribes was fired. A federal jobs program was redirected to actually serve the community it was supposed to serve. 2 more police brutality cases were investigated, and 2 more officers were disciplined. Each action was small, but together, they added up to something Harlem had never seen before. Tangible evidence that someone in Washington was listening. And Bumpy delivered his end of the bargain. He sent word through his network. The street soldiers, the numbers runners, the shop owners, the bartenders, the barbers. Anyone who touched the community. Spread the word. Register to vote. And when the time comes, vote Kennedy. Not because the Kennedys are saints. But because this time, they're keeping their promises. By November, voter registration in Harlem was up 30%. And it was only the beginning. But here is the thing about secrets. They never stay secret. Not when J. Edgar Hoover was watching. The FBI had been tapping Bumpy Johnson's phone since March 1963. It was part of Hoover's obsession with what he called the black nationalist movement. Hoover saw conspiracies everywhere. He believed that civil rights leaders were communist agents. He believed that any black man with power was a threat to the nation. And he especially believed that Bumpy Johnson, a man who operated outside the law and commanded the loyalty of an entire community, was one of the most dangerous men in America. The wiretap on Bumpy's phone was technically illegal. Hoover had not obtained a warrant. He had simply ordered it done, the way he ordered most things done, through intimidation and secrecy. And for 9 months, the tap had produced nothing useful. Just gambling talk, numbers running, petty disputes. But on November 14, 1963, Agent Thomas Riley hit the jackpot. He recorded 23 minutes of conversation between Bumpy Johnson and Robert Kennedy. 23 minutes that discussed voter registration, federal policy, political strategy, and most damaging of all, an explicit agreement that Bumpy would deliver the black vote in exchange for policy concessions. To Hoover, this was gold. This was the weapon he had been waiting for his entire career. Because J. Edgar Hoover hated Robert Kennedy. Hated him with a passion that went beyond professional rivalry. Kennedy had tried to bring the FBI under the control of the Justice Department, which technically it already was, but which in practice Hoover had operated as his own independent kingdom for decades. Kennedy had pushed back on Hoover's obsessive surveillance of civil rights leaders. Kennedy had demanded results on organized crime investigations that Hoover had deliberately slow-walked for years. And worst of all, Kennedy had treated Hoover with open contempt, going around him, ignoring his recommendations, making it clear that he viewed the aging FBI director as a relic from another era. Hoover wanted revenge. And now he had it. A tape of the Attorney General making a deal with a gangster. A tape that would destroy Kennedy's reputation. A tape that would end any chance of a Kennedy political dynasty. A tape that would prove what Hoover had been saying for years, that the Kennedys were corrupt, that they would deal with criminals, that they could not be trusted. On November 18, 1963, Hoover requested a private meeting with President Kennedy. His intention was to play the tape. To give the president an ultimatum. Fire your brother or I release this to the press. But history intervened. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. The world stopped. America went into mourning. And in the chaos that followed, Hoover put the tape in his personal safe. He would wait. The timing had to be right. Robert Kennedy was now a grieving brother, a sympathetic figure. Releasing the tape immediately would backfire. But eventually, when the mourning ended, when Kennedy tried to build his own political future, Hoover would be ready. What Hoover did not know was that Bumpy Johnson had already discovered the wiretap. 3 weeks earlier. Before any of this happened. Bumpy had a source inside the FBI. A janitor who worked the night shift at the Manhattan field office. A man named William Carter, whose brother Bumpy had helped get out of prison 10 years earlier. Carter did not have access to classified information. But he had eyes. And he noticed something strange. 2 agents working late every night. Headphones, tape recorders, and paperwork that mentioned Harlem surveillance. Carter told Bumpy. And Bumpy, being Bumpy, did not panic. He did not stop talking on the phone. He did not change his behavior. He kept meeting with Kennedy. Kept making plans. Kept building the partnership. Because Bumpy Johnson understood something that most men did not understand. Information is a weapon. And a weapon is only as dangerous as the person holding it. If Hoover thought he had a secret tape, then Hoover would act on it. He would try to use it. He would reveal himself. And when he did, Bumpy would be ready. Bumpy began recording his own conversations. Not just with Kennedy, but with everyone. He had a man in New York who could build recording devices. Small reel-to-reel recorders hidden in briefcases, in lamps, in furniture. And Bumpy started keeping a record. Every meeting, every promise, every action Kennedy took that helped Harlem. He was building a counter-narrative. A story that, if it ever became public, would show not corruption but partnership. Not conspiracy but cooperation. Not a gangster manipulating a politician but 2 men trying to help a community that the rest of America had abandoned. By the time Kennedy's assassination threw everything into chaos, Bumpy had 47 recordings. 47 tapes that documented federal housing improvements in Harlem. 47 tapes that showed police brutality cases being addressed. 47 tapes that proved voter registration was happening not through coercion but through community organizing. Bumpy waited. He knew Hoover would make his move eventually. He just did not know when. It took 3 years. In 1966, Robert Kennedy was serving as senator from New York. He was building a political base. He was talking about running for president. And J. Edgar Hoover finally decided the time was right. On March 15, 1966, Hoover requested a private meeting with Senator Kennedy. The meeting took place in a hotel room in Washington. Neutral territory. Hoover arrived with a single aide. Kennedy arrived alone. Hoover got straight to the point. Senator Kennedy, I have in my possession a recording from November 1963. A recording of you speaking with a convicted criminal named Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Kennedy's face showed nothing. I see. The recording documents an agreement between you and this criminal. An agreement in which you promised federal policy concessions in exchange for his help delivering votes for your brother's re-election campaign. Kennedy remained silent. If this recording were to become public, Hoover continued, it would destroy your political career. It would taint your brother's legacy. It would call into question every civil rights initiative your administration pursued. Kennedy finally spoke. What do you want? Hoover smiled. The smile of a man who believed he had won. I want you to withdraw from public life. No presidential run. No more interference with bureau operations. And a public statement supporting my continued leadership of the FBI. Kennedy looked at Hoover. For a long time. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. You find this amusing. This is about to destroy everything you've built. Kennedy shook his head. You know, Mr. Hoover, I always knew this day would come. I knew you had that tape. I've known for 3 years. Hoover's smile faded. That's impossible. Kennedy reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a single photograph. He slid it across the table. Hoover looked at the photograph. His face went gray. It was a picture of Agent Thomas Riley. Standing outside the FBI field office. And standing next to him, clearly visible, was the janitor William Carter. The man who worked for Bumpy Johnson. You had a leak, Kennedy said quietly. And that leak told Bumpy Johnson everything. Including the fact that you were recording our conversations illegally. Without a warrant. In direct violation of federal law. Hoover's hands were shaking. But the photograph was not the weapon. The photograph was just proof that Kennedy knew. The real weapon came next. Kennedy pulled out another envelope. This one was thick, heavy. He opened it and spread the contents across the table. 47 photographs, each one showing a document. Internal FBI memos. Surveillance orders. Reports on civil rights leaders. Reports on politicians. Reports on journalists. Reports on anyone Hoover considered a threat. And most damaging of all, reports on Hoover himself. Personal reports. Reports about his private life. His habits. His secrets. The kind of secrets that would destroy a man who had built his entire career on appearing morally impeccable. Bumpy Johnson has been keeping files, Kennedy said. For 30 years. On everyone. Including you. Hoover could not speak. You tried to weaponize information, Kennedy continued. But you forgot something. Bumpy Johnson has been playing this game longer than you have. And he's better at it. Kennedy gathered the photographs. Put them back in the envelope. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Hoover. You're going to destroy that tape from 1963. Every copy. Every transcript. Every record that it ever existed. Hoover found his voice. And if I refuse, then these files go to the Washington Post. Every single one. Including the ones about you personally. Hoover's face was the color of chalk. You're bluffing. I never bluff. I learned that from a friend in Harlem. Kennedy stood up. You have 24 hours. After that, I cannot control what happens. Bumpy Johnson is not a patient man. Kennedy walked out. And J. Edgar Hoover sat in that hotel room for an hour. Not moving. Not speaking. Just staring at the empty table where his entire life had almost ended. 23 hours later, the tape from November 14, 1963 was destroyed. Every copy. Every transcript. Every record. It officially never existed. And J. Edgar Hoover never attempted to move against Robert Kennedy again. The story of what happened in that hotel room did not become public until decades later, when researchers piecing together FBI records found references to a tape that no longer existed. Gaps in the archive. Memos that referred to surveillance that had no corresponding recordings. They asked questions. And eventually, pieces of the truth emerged. But the full story, the story of how Bumpy Johnson protected Robert Kennedy, how he turned Hoover's weapon against him, how he used 30 years of intelligence gathering to checkmate the most powerful law enforcement official in American history, that story was only known to a handful of people. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968. Ironically, Robert Kennedy died the same year, assassinated in Los Angeles while running for president. But in the years between 1963 and 1968, something remarkable happened in Harlem. Voter registration continued to climb. Federal programs actually reached the people they were supposed to reach. Police brutality declined, not because cops suddenly became good people, but because they knew someone was watching. Someone who had connections they did not understand. Someone who could make phone calls that ended careers. Bumpy Johnson never took credit. He never talked about his relationship with Kennedy. He never mentioned the FBI tape or Hoover's attempt at blackmail or how he had turned the tables. He just kept doing what he had always done. Protecting Harlem. Looking out for his people. Playing chess while everyone else played checkers. Years later, a journalist asked one of Bumpy's old associates about the Kennedy connection. The old man smiled. You want to know the truth about Bumpy Johnson? The truth is that he could have been anything. Politician. Businessman. Lawyer. He was smarter than all of them. But he chose to stay in Harlem. Chose to stay in the shadows. Because he knew something that most people never figure out. Power is not about titles. It is not about offices. It is about leverage. And Bumpy Johnson had more leverage than presidents and FBI directors combined. He just never needed to use it. Until he did. The journalist asked what he meant. The old man's smile faded. There's a reason J. Edgar Hoover never touched Harlem after 1966. A reason the FBI stayed away. A reason certain politicians suddenly started caring about our community. You think that was coincidence? You think that was luck? That was Bumpy Johnson, playing a game so deep nobody else could even see the board. He protected Robert Kennedy, a white man, an attorney general who should have been his enemy. Why? Because Kennedy kept his promises. Because Kennedy actually tried to help. And Bumpy rewarded loyalty above everything else. Did not matter if you were black or white. Rich or poor, Democrat or Republican, if you kept your word to Bumpy Johnson, he would walk through fire for you. And if you broke it, he would make sure you never forgot. The journalist asked one more question. Did Kennedy ever acknowledge what Bumpy did for him? The old man was quiet for a long time. Then he said, in 1967, Robert Kennedy gave a speech at a church in Harlem. It was about poverty, about justice, about the soul of America. And at the end of that speech, Kennedy said something strange. He said, "The men who truly change the world are not the ones who seek credit. They are the ones who work in the shadows, who never ask for recognition, who simply do what must be done. And I have been privileged to know one such man." He did not say Bumpy's name. He did not need to. Everyone in that church knew who he was talking about. And Bumpy Johnson, sitting in the back row where nobody could see him, nodded once. Then he left, disappeared into the Harlem night. Still protecting, still watching, still 3 moves ahead of everyone. That is the story of the FBI wiretap that almost changed American history. The story of how a Harlem gangster and a Kennedy brother formed an alliance that neither could acknowledge. The story of how J. Edgar Hoover tried to destroy them both and lost. The story of why the FBI stayed out of Harlem for a generation. And the story of how one man, armed with nothing but intelligence and leverage, outplayed the most powerful people in the world. Bumpy Johnson did not care about history books. He did not care about credit. He cared about results. And the results are still visible today. In the community centers that got funded. In the voter registration numbers that stayed high. In the message that went out to every power broker in America. You do not mess with Harlem. Not because Harlem is violent. But because Harlem is protected. By a man who sees everything. Knows everything. And never, ever forgets. They called him the Godfather of Harlem. But in truth, he was something more than that. He was the guardian of a community that nobody else cared about. The protector of people that the rest of America ignored. The chess master who made presidents and FBI directors look like amateurs. And in the end, when the dust settled and the tapes were destroyed and the deals were done, Bumpy Johnson went back to what he always did. Walking the streets of Harlem. Checking on the old women who needed help. Making sure the kids had somewhere to go. Being present. Being watchful. Being Bumpy. Robert Kennedy once said that the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. But Bumpy Johnson knew better. The future belongs to those who are willing to fight for it. Not with speeches, not with promises, but with action, with sacrifice, with the kind of love for your people that makes you willing to dance with presidents and FBI directors if that is what it takes. Harlem remembers. Harlem always remembers. And this story, the story of the tape that never officially existed, is proof that sometimes the most important history is the history that nobody knows. If this story made you see Bumpy Johnson differently, if it made you understand that there are layers to history that textbooks will never tell you, then hit that subscribe button right now. We are telling the untold stories. The real stories. The ones that powerful people tried to bury. And next time, we are going deeper. Into the night. Bumpy Johnson walked into a meeting with 5 mafia bosses and walked out with an agreement that protected Harlem for 20 years. You are not ready for that one. But you will be. Turn on notifications so you do not miss it. And remember what Bumpy always said. In this world, you do not wait for respect. You earn it. You protect it. And when someone comes for what is yours, you make sure they understand the cost. Bumpy Johnson understood. And now, so do you.